Hi, my name's Tracy James and I'm from Cotton and Crumbs Cakes based in the UK. Today in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make a beautiful O'Hara rose. These flowers are becoming much more popular on wedding cakes, so I thought it'd be a nice one to talk you through and hopefully you'll enjoy this video. First of all, I'm going to just talk you through everything we need to make this flower. So starting with the basics, so we've got a non-stick board for rolling out the paste onto. We've got a petal pad for thinning over the edges of some of the petals. Rolling pin. This is a small one, you could use a slightly bigger one if you preferred, which is fine. We've got some basics such as some vegetable shortening. This is just Trex, it's a type of vegetable fat. This is just for softening down the paste. Some edible glue, any brand is fine. We're going to be using the Flamingo Pink Sugar Flare colour today for this flower. It's a really nice blush pink, doesn't need any other colours adding to it. Some cocktail sticks, always need these for any flowers you're making. We've got some Squire's Florist paste. This is the one I always use for making all my flowers. It dries nice and firm. Just some polystyrene just to put your flower into whilst you're working on the petals. We've got some florist tape for just wrapping around the wire. We've got a 50mm polystyrene ball. This is for the centre of the flower. So we're going to be using this, and you can get these from eBay or any kind of craft shop online. A serrated knife just for cutting that ball. We need to make it a little bit smaller, so we'll be using a serrated knife for that. What else have we got? So in the pot here, we've got a 20 gauge wire. This is what we're going to be using to put through the polystyrene. Some wire cutters for cutting. These wires are quite thick, so we need some wire cutters for that. A sharp knife, paintbrush for your glue, and some scissors. And then for actually making the flower, I'm just going to talk through the petal cutters that we're going to use and the veiner. So to begin with, we're going to be using some rose petal cutters. Now these are just basic petal cutters. Most people have already got things like this at home, but I'll just show you the sizes of them in case you just want to make sure you've got something of similar size to use. So in centimetres, the largest one is 5 centimetres by 4 centimetres. The medium sized one is 4 centimetres by 3 centimetres, and then the smaller one of the three is 3 centimetres by 2.5 centimetres. We've also got a larger rose petal cutter, and this is for the outside petals, and this one is roughly 6.5 centimetres by around 5 centimetres, so something roughly of those sizes. And then for some of the inner petals, we're going to actually be using a set of eucalyptus cutters. These ones come in a set of 3, and they are from a company called Valley Cutters. You can buy them, I believe, on Amazon, or you can get them through cakestuff.com. Now we're actually only going to be using the 2 bigger ones, so I'm just going to put that to one side. We don't need that one. Now the medium size one is 3 centimetres by 3 centimetres, and then the larger one is 4 centimetres by 4 centimetres. And then last of all, we're going to also be using a rose veiner. Again, if you have a rose veiner set at home, you can use what you already have. You don't have to buy this specific one. I do like this one. This is from Squire's Kitchen, and it is called a very large tea rose veiner. It's a nice size and it gives you just about enough texture. I'll just give you a little size guide on this as well, just to make sure you know roughly what we're looking at size wise. So this is 7 centimeters down and about 7 centimeters across. Okay, so now we're going to get started on actually making the flower. So first thing we want to do is colour up some paste, and this is for mainly for the centre petals on this flower, and then we will go slightly lighter for the outer layers of petals. So let's get some paste out and I'll show you roughly how much. There are quite a lot of petals on the inside, not so many on the outside, so most of the work for this flower is in the middle. So if I just put that in my hand, you can see roughly how much you're going to need for this flower. It will obviously depend on how thick or thin you roll your petals as well. So I'm just going to take some Trex and add this into the paste just to make it a little bit softer and more pliable to work with. It's amazing how much of a difference the Trex or shortening actually makes to the consistency of the paste. It's quite greasy, but you don't need very much of it, just a little bit. And then we'll take a cocktail stick and some colouring. So this one, it looks very strong in pink, but it's actually quite a soft colour. So I'm going to put a fair amount of it in because, like I say, it doesn't actually go that dark and it's quite sort of pastel-y coloured. So obviously you can always add colour in if you need to. You don't want to go too wild with the colour to begin with and go really dark, and then you need to use a lot more paste to make it lighter. So let's just quickly work that through, just so you can get an idea of how that's going to look. It probably looks quite light in this light as well, but I always find with flowers that when you start adding petals together, the colour intensifies anyway, so you don't want to go too dark. I think sometimes it's easy to think, oh no, it hardly looks like any colour, but like I say, when you start adding the petals together, it does intensify. So let's get rid of this. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is to make 18 petals. So we want to take the largest eucalyptus cutter that we spoke about, and then the 2 of the smaller rose petal cutters. So these are the 3 that we're going to be using first of all. And we're going to be rolling out the paste and cutting out 6 of those, 6 of these and 6 of these ones, so 18 in total. So when you're rolling the paste out, you don't need to roll out a huge amount of paste, or else you'll be there forever trying to roll it thin enough, because we want this to be nice and thin, what we're working with. Any that you're not using, just pop that back in your bag so it doesn't dry out, because it can go quite crusty quite quick. So I'm going to start rolling this paste out. Try and get it sort of stuck down onto the board a little bit when you're rolling, just so that it doesn't keep wrapping around the rolling pin, hopefully. And we need to roll out a fairly large section of paste. And if you find it a struggle to roll out your paste by hand, you can always use a pasta machine to roll out nice and thin. Especially if you struggle with your wrists or your hands, or if you just don't have a lot of strength in your arms, because it can be a bit of a workout rolling it nice and thinly. Just keep moving it on the board, making sure it's not too stuck down, because then it will be even more difficult to roll. And what I'm looking for is for it to almost be sort of see-through, so I can see it through my fingertips. Okay, so let me just show you through there so you can sort of see my my hands through there, so it is quite thin. So you will be cutting out 6 of these ones, and then you want to cut out 6 of the medium-sized rose petal and 6 of the smaller one. Now I'm just cutting out 1 of each so I can show you how to roll over the edges, but when you come to do it at home you'll be rolling out 6 of each. I just didn't want to keep repeating myself with all of the petals. I will show you afterwards how they look once they're all rolled out. So let's just put that away as well. So when you've got all 18 petals cut out on your board, if you work quite slowly, you might want to put them in a protector so that they don't dry out too quick. If not, then you can just leave them out and work on them fairly quickly. So what we're going to do to thin out the edges of these petals is to put the petal directly on the non-stick board and use the rolling pin to thin over the edges. The reason we do this and not on a petal pad straight away is because when you put them on the petal pad and thin them, they go quite wavy around the edges, which we don't want. We want them to be nice and thin and flat. So all we're doing is using the rolling pin to flatten down over the very edge of the petal. So I'm not rolling hard over the centre of the petal, it's just on the edges. So just use both hands to just thin out the edge. Try and retain the shape of the petal if you can, so that you're not losing the shape too much. It will inevitably lose its shape a little bit, but that's fine. That's absolutely fine. What you're looking for, you don't need to worry too much around the bottom of it either. It's mainly this top part here. So this part's thin and flat, and this part's slightly thicker in the middle. So I'm just going to peel that up so that you can see the edges of it are really nice and thin and fine. And that is important. When you put the petals together in the centre, it will look much nicer if the petals are really super thin on the edges. So let me show you on these other 2 petals as well. So again, it's important that you're only pressing down on the rolling pin as you go over the ridge at the edge of the petal. If you go over all the way in the middle as well, the petals are going to become huge and not very easy to handle. So it's just a case of going over the edges. Those in a sec. So once again, just thin over the edges. It is a little bit time consuming doing it like this, but you will get a really lovely result if you bear with it. Okay, so again you can see that's lovely and thin around the edge now, and it's not too wavy. You can even just stick them down onto a board so that they don't ruffle up too much. So when you've done that on all 18, I'm just going to show you some that I've already done in advance. So these are the ones I've already done. So I've just thinned over all of them. So I've got 6 of the large, 6 of the medium, and then 6 of the smaller ones. So now I'm going to show you how to stick them together and also prepare the bud. So the best thing to do with these petals, once you've thinned them all out, they will be really soft, and we want them to be slightly firmer in texture. So once you've rolled them all, if you just leave them for a couple of minutes while you do the next part of preparing the bud. So I'm just going to leave them to one side for a minute, just so that they dry out slightly, because when we stick them together, we don't want the petals to sit too flat on top of each other. They need to have a little bit of movement between the petals. So whilst they're drying slightly, we're just going to prepare the centre part for it. So this polystyrene ball, like I said before, is 50 millimetres or 5 centimetres across. And when you buy polystyrene balls, they've pretty much always got a line, a seam going down the middle, so we can use that as a guide for cutting. So this is the centre, and we're going to cut about a quarter of it off. So I'm just going to use the knife, and be careful with your fingers, and just slide down and cut that off. not great if you don't like polystyrene textures. So let's just get rid of any little wispy parts. So you can see there how much I've cut off there. So we're using this part, and this part can just be disregarded. Then we're going to turn this over and take a cocktail stick, and we're just going to make a hole through the polystyrene all the way through and out the other side. So you need to come down about halfway, and then just, if you can, try and keep this stick quite level. Just push that through and out the other side, like so. This is just to make the initial hole. This is where the wire is going to go through. So we take this out, and then take your 20 gauge wire and then feed that back through where you've made the hole and out the other side. Don't worry if you lose a bit of polystyrene, it's absolutely fine. This is the safest way, I think, to make the buds for your flowers, because if you ever need to hang them upside down, or even just when you're attaching to your cakes, they're not going to come out of this polystyrene instead of just gluing a stick in the bottom of it. So we're going to just feed that wire through to the centre of the polystyrene ball, and then I'm going to bend the wires up the sides quite flat against here, so not sort of coming out and then up, just flat against the sides of the dome. And then we're just going to crisscross those over each other and twist that around really tightly. So the more you twist it, the more this wire is going to embed into the polystyrene, and that's what you want, because you don't want this to be swinging back and forth when you're working on it, because it will be a bit of a pain for you really if that happens. So make sure that's nice and tight, and then you just continue to twist all the way down to form the stalk of the flower. This will be covered in tape, so don't worry about how this looks. So bring that all the way down to the bottom there. And then that's really secure then. So, you know, if it was when you're transporting your cakes or you're transporting the flowers, you know that that's not going to fall out of the stick. So what we want to do before we put these petals onto here is to just cover this, the top of this, with a piece of paste. So I'm just going to take a little bit of paste and roll this out, and you just want to check which size cutter is going to cover the polystyrene. So I think we'll go with the blue cutter, because we can always stretch it across. So let's just get this little bit of paste rolled out. Like I say, you don't need to roll out too much, it's just enough to make one petal to stick onto the top of the polystyrene. We just cover the polystyrene just so that it's easier to stick the petals onto that than to stick it directly onto the foam. So it doesn't need to be too thin or too thick, just sort of normal size. And then I'm just going to use this cutter to cut one of those out. And if it's not big enough, it's slightly small, so just give that a little roll over on your board just to make it a little bit wider so it fits. And then just turn this over, and then we will just want to paint some glue all over the back of this. So let's grab the glue, just a light layer of glue, and just paint that all over the back of this petal. And then take your polystyrene and just press it onto there. And then if it's just slightly short, just manipulate it out with your fingertips, just stretch it out. It really doesn't matter what this looks like, it's just to cover the ball. We're not going to see any of it. If you wanted to use the larger cutter instead for this, you could do, and just smooth it down the sides of the polystyrene. It really doesn't matter too much. Okay, so we'll just put that back in the polystyrene. And let's go back to our petals that we made earlier. So to stick them together now, the process is as follows. So you want to take two large ones line them up on your board from right over to left, and 2 medium, and then 2 of the slightly smaller ones. So we're going to have 3 sets altogether. So you want your glue, and we haven't turned these petals over, they're still on the fronts for now. So we just take a little bit of glue and just paint a little dab of it on the bottom left side. You then want to take your next one and place it on top slightly so you can see a little bit of the first petal. Then glue again onto this one and repeat with the next petal. Might just need a little bit more glue, and bottom left again, and then keep repeating. So you're just layering the petals from large down to smaller at the top. And it's important not to put too much glue on this part because you still want to have a bit of movement between the petals. If you stick them too flat to each other, when you twist them around, they won't have as much of a flow. They'll all just be a little bit flat and nondescript. So that's sort of what you end up with, and you want to repeat that again with the next set. So let's just speed this up a little now. So glue, place on top. You'll find that they will sort of curve around because of the different size dimensions of them, that's fine. Again, not too much glue, so they do sort of curve around. And then your last set, these have dried slightly, so I can still obviously move them around quite a lot, but they're just a little bit dry on the edges, which is perfect really for this, what we're doing. So now we've got our 3 sets of them. The next thing we're going to do is to twist them around to form little sort of swirly centres for this centre of this flower. So just take the first one that you did, because it's probably slightly drier, and what we want to do is turn it around. So we're working from the smallest side, the top part, and you just want to take your fingertips and just wrap that round quite tightly to begin with for the centre, and then lift it up in your hands, and then just very, very loosely wrap it around itself, not too tight. So can you see there how sort of loose that is? If you do it too tight, it just looks really small and not very sort of roughly looking. So that's what you want to do, and you'll see that I'm not actually sticking that on. I want to let that sort of sit loosely, and then take your knife, because when we sit this on the top of the flower, it's going to be too long that way, so we need to trim a bit off the body of it. So I'm going to cut about 1/3 off the bottom of this, and then I'm just going to leave this on the board for a second while I do the other 2, and you'll see that it's sort of opening out. That's fine, leave it like that. So let's start from the smallest part, and we're just going to ravel that around itself quite tightly to begin with, and then pick it up in your hands and then just ravel that round as loosely as you can, like that. So you can see it's still sort of fairly open there, but a little bit more closed in the centre. And then just going to trim off the bottom 1/3 again, so try and keep all 3 roughly the same height as each other. And then again with the third one. So tightly on the board with your fingertips, and then lift it up, and then just loosely around like that. Trim again, and then we're going to stick them onto the top here. So we're going to take our polystyrene ball, and we just need a light layer of glue all over the top of this. Not too much glue. If it's swimming in glue, they're going to slide around all over the place. They're not easy to stick on as it is, so just very lightly with that. And then we're going to pick these up, and we're going to place them into 3 sections in the centre of the polystyrene. And I'm just sort of letting that outer part sit out. And when I stick it on, you could do with it an extra pair of hands at this point, but just try and squash it down a little bit so that it's not too neat looking. And then I'm going to take the second one and add that on as well. And then make sure that these are not hanging over the edge of the polystyrene. And then I'm going to take the third one and place it in there. So excuse my fingers a second while I just get those on. So I'm just making sure that all 3 are in the centre there, and that these bits that are flowing out are not hanging over the edge of the polystyrene too much. When you've got them on, you need to fold in some of the petals. So if you take a cocktail stick and just hold it in place with your hands, just use the cocktail stick just to fold the tops inwards a little bit so that it's not too open, and you're just separating the petals out as well from each other so that again they're not sitting too flat on top of each other. So just separating them out like that. There's a fine line between it being too dry and too soft at this stage. This is just drying a touch more than I would have liked, but it's still fine to work with, okay? So you can see now that and you can see how the colour has slightly got darker now that we've got all the petals stuck together with it. When you are putting it back in the polystyrene while you're working on the next stage, just make sure that it's not leaning at all. Make sure it's nice and upright so that these petals don't fall off whilst they're drying out. So let's put that back into here. And then the next stage would be to repeat that process, but with the smaller of the 2 eucalyptus cutters that we've been using. So we've already used that one, so we're not using this one again. We're just going to be using the slightly smaller one. And these petals that we're going to make next are just to fill the gaps of what we've just put onto the centre of the rose. So it's exactly the same process. You don't need to lighten the colour, just keep the colour the same. And you want to cut out, I usually go for around 12 to 13 petals. So you just roll the paste out exactly the same as before, cut out, go for 13. Nice and thin again, and then you roll over the edges with the rolling pin again like before. So it's exactly the same process. And let's just grab the ones that we've already done. So I'm going to take them out of here. So like I say, it's just this cutter, and I usually work out about 12 to 13 is about the right amount. If you want to make a few extra, that's fine. Take these out of here. It's always handy to have a little plastic wallet just to keep petals in, to stop them from drying out too quickly, depending on your circumstances. So again, it's nice to let them dry out slightly before you add them onto the rose. And what we're doing with these, we're just going to be weaving them in and out of what we've already put on to here. So what you'll probably need to do before you start adding these onto the flower is to just add a little bit more glue to the sections that have probably dried out, and a little bit on the sides as well. So let's just paint around the sides here. Maybe a little bit up on the sides of the petals as well, just to help these other ones to stick. And you can always add glue as you go along as well. Okay, so with these ones, I'm not actually going to be sticking them together because I want them to be sitting quite loose. So usually it would just pick up a couple of petals together so there's a bit of a gap between them, and then just feed them through. Again, extra pair of hands would be helpful. Just feed them through the centre there, so you can see they're sitting from the centre and then they're coming out. And then you want to just sort of bend them in and over as you stick. And then the tops of them can be folded inwards as well. So you'll see that this will just start to fill in the gaps. What you don't want to do is create another swirl in between. They're just lines of petals more so. So another couple, and then I'm just moving this round into the next section and feeding it round. You'll see they'll sit slightly taller. That's fine because you're always going to fold them inwards. So it is a little bit fiddly this stage, just bear with it. The more you do these, the more you practice them, the easier it will get. So I'm just kind of squashing down because you're not going to see any of this here, so don't worry about what that looks like, just worry about the top part of it and keep going. Sometimes they are a little bit fiddly to work with. Let's just try and get that in there a little bit more. The centres of these flowers are not neat by any stretch, so that you're not looking for neat with this. So just bring them around, squidge them in there and fold over the tops as well. Make sure nothing's coming apart. You might just need to use your hands just to squash them in a little bit. You just want to make sure you can still just about see these three swirls in here. So I don't think I'm going to really need any more petals because the outer ones that go on next are going to sort of shape in to the side anyway. So you're just having a look from the top. Again, with your cocktail stick, just fold over and separate some of these petals. So I've still got 3 left, but I'm not going to use them for the sake of it. Just use whatever you need to fill the gaps. You can see here and around here, there's still a little bit of gap. But when we put the 8 petals for the next stage around here, we'll be sort of fitting them in so that the flower looks a little bit, almost like a heart shape when it's when the outside ones are on there. So I'm going to leave that for now, and that's going to be the centre part of the flower finished. So I'm going to just pop that back into here. Now at this stage, you're probably going to just want to make your paste a little bit lighter in colour for the outer layers. So whatever paste you've got left, so some of this pink that we've got, I'm just going to add a little bit of white. into the paste. So let me just show you the quantities. So the quantities to work with for the next shade, I'm just going to do sort of half white to one colour in terms of ratios. So we don't have as much white, and then just mix those in together before we start rolling out for the next layer of petals. So quickly mix that through. And this will just lighten it a bit. I prefer to do this way to get a graduation of colour rather than doing it all one shade and then dusting, because dusting can go horribly wrong to the best of people. So it's a lot easier just to get a little bit of shade in with adding white to each layer of the flower that you're making. So I've mixed that through, and the next amount of petals we're going to be using is 8 of these ones. So this is the biggest of the plastic rose petals that we used before. So it's this one now, and we're going to make 8 petals. So we're going to roll the paste out. I'm just going to do a couple to show you what you need to do for these ones, and then I'll show you some that I've already made. These petals don't need to be paper thin like we did for the inner ones, so you don't need to roll it as thin as before, so I can't see my fingertips through it too much. So that should be enough. Always peel your paste off the board before you cut with these cutters so it's not too stuck, and then just give that a press down and circle around, and that will give you a neat cut on there. So you can see there roughly the thickness, a millimetre or 2. So just cut a couple out, but you will be cutting 8 out when you come to do this. Right, so this time, again, we're just going to use the rolling pin to thin over the edges. And trying to keep the shape of the petal as much as you can. The good thing with rose petals, they're not all exactly symmetrical, so don't worry if you lose it a little bit. So again, it's nice and thin around the edge and slightly thicker in the centre part. And you can see the difference in size from this to this by doing that. If you roll your paste too thick, your petals are going to become gigantic, so important not to roll it too thick to begin with. Okay, so try and get them roughly the same size as each other, and as I said before, you'll be making 8 of these. The next stage is we're going to be bringing in the veiner now, and when you're using the veiner you don't need to rub it with Trex or cornflour or anything. They don't stick, so they're absolutely fine to use as they are. And we're always going to be putting the petal in the part that dips downwards rather than the part that sticks out. And I'm just going to place that into there, and what I want is for the petal to be sitting over where this little ridge is here, because that will just give us a little bit of movement with the petal when we vein it. So place it into there, and then the top part on, and then you can either squeeze it like this between your hands, but when you're making a lot of flowers that can really affect your wrists after a while. So I try to just leave it on the board and just use my fingertips just to press down all over, then I can get maximum pressure on there. When you take it out, you just want to peel it out from the side or from the bottom, and that should come out fairly easy. So now you can see the difference between the petals. So we just got the flat one from before, and this one's got a little bit of a sort of groove at the top there and a little bit of lined veins on here. So let's do that again. So points at the bottom. The petal's always still just left on the front as well. I haven't turned the petal over, it's still front side up. And then into there, a bit of pressing down. And then carefully peel that out. So when you've done all 8 of them, we're going to stick them onto the flower. So here's some I did earlier. And this time I'm going to just turn them over onto their backs before I put the glue on. So they're all on their backs, and then with the glue, you need to just paint a layer of glue on the left and right side of each petal. And you want to paint it about 3/4 high, all the way down to the point which is the base of the petal, and then up the other side. So let's get those all painted in the same way. And then we're going to stick them around the sides now of the rose. Always handy to have a cloth when you're working with glue. It gets very sticky and then fibres can get transported onto the petals. So let's put these petals on here now. So these 8 petals are going to sit around the sides of here, and they're just going to sort of cup into the gaps slightly as well. So when you're placing them on, you want to be sticking the bottom part of it really to the polystyrene there, and you want them to sit at about the same height as these petals. So when I'm looking from the back, I'm going to stick the left side of it down, and I actually want to attach that petal onto the inner petals. I'm not going to stick the right side of it down because the 8th one is going to sit inside there. And then the next one is going to sit on top of that one. When you put the second one on, if you just hold the one side and stretch the left side over a little bit, and you can see there that that is now sitting into that gap. Smooth all of the bottom part down and a little bit of the right side as well. And as you're going along with these petals, some of them you can fold the tops inwards slightly, and others you might want to fold outwards slightly, so just sort of pinch it out a little bit, just so that they don't all look the same as each other. So let's work along the sides again. Always just keep checking the height of it. And making sure that we're sort of sitting in the gaps, so it won't be completely symmetrically round there. Keep an eye on your spacing as well. So you've got 8 petals to go on, so when you've got 4 petals placed on here, you should be sort of halfway around. Again, I'm just going to fold that in a little bit because I don't want to see the gaps around the sides that were originally there. It does help with these petals again if they have slightly dried out, so that they're not flopping out too much. And I'm just going to fold that back a little bit. Even if they've dried a little bit, when you fold them back they sort of look a little bit torn, which is pretty much what you want anyway, so don't worry about too many of them being neat. This one I'm not going to fold it in or out because I don't want them to be sort of one folded in and one folded out. I want them to be more random. Just come in a little bit there. And then when you put the 8th one on, it needs to sit inside the first one. So just make sure that that is tucking in a little bit. And you always want to do this as well while these are still soft, because you might need to, you know, sort of manipulate them a little bit, shape them in, and then your first one comes over the top of the 8th one. And again, just either fold in or fold out here and there on the tops, not on the sides too much. Be careful as well that you don't use your hands to hold the sides of the flower when you're putting them on. You'll see I'm always using my fingertips to sort of hold the bottom part of the bud. I'm not holding it like this, which some people do. And then you end up sort of coming in and back out again at the top, which you don't want. You want to try and sort of retain the shape of this. So always sort of have a look from the top and just make sure you're happy with the shape of it. And like I say, it doesn't need to be very, very round here. You want to be sort of coming in at places or going out at places like that. Okay, so this would be the stage now where we want to leave the flower to dry. So there's different ways of speeding up drying times for your flowers. So you can either just leave it naturally to dry, and for naturally you would probably want to wait about an hour depending on how humid your conditions are. So an hour would let it dry firmly before we add the next layer on. We don't want to put the next layer on now because we're just going to squash everything we've done. So by letting stages dry, it just leaves you with a nice sort of largish flower. The other way you can speed up the drying time is you can either put the flower on top of a radiator that's on. It won't melt the flower, it will just make the petals dry really firm really quickly. Alternatively, if you don't have your radiators on, if you're working in the summer, you wouldn't have them on, you can use your oven. So if you have a fan oven, put it on at about 80 degrees and then just put your wire in the rack of the oven and leave it there for about 5 minutes, and then it will be rock hard and you can continue straight away. It just saves all the hanging around waiting for things to dry. Maybe put your alarm on your oven so you don't forget about it and you're not ending up cooking your flowers at all. So we're going to leave this now for an hour and then we're going to come back and work on the next stage. So welcome back, and this flower is now dried. This is one I made earlier, so it's nice and firm, just so that we can continue with the next stage of the flower. So again, you would just want to add a little bit of white into your paste before continuing. So I'm just going to now mix together the same quantity of white and colour. So the next layer of the rose is going to be a little bit lighter again. Right, so once that's mixed in, you're going to be now working on the next stage, which is this cutter. This is the largest of all of the cutters that we're using, and you need to make 6 of these, and it's the same as before. So I'm just going to roll out one to show you the whole process of it, but when you come to do it, you'll be making 6 of these. So let me just roll out a little bit. Again, try and stick the paste down. It's really annoying when it just keeps rolling around the rolling pin all the time. Not too thick again, because these petals are really large, so make sure your paste is nice and thin. And then always peel off before you cut down into that. So a little circular motion to cut it nice and neat. Same as before, so you're just rolling over the edges. Again, really important with these ones that you're just pressing down on the very outer ridge, because they will become very, very large if you're rolling over too much of the body of the petal. And then we're still going to use the veiner again. And these ones should just about fit in the veiner and give that a good press down. The only difference with these ones compared to the last layer is we're going to be using the cocktail stick to fold over the top edges of the petal, so they're a little bit pointier looking. So we'll bring in our foam pad for this stage and the petal. And again, I haven't turned it over, the petal's still on the front, and you're just going to be using your stick to fold in the top edges. Now you'll see there's a little crease there from what the veiner has created. So I'm going to work to the left and the right of that. And I'm just going to pick up this paste here. And then I'm going to wrap that around the stick. So left finger there, right finger here, and together roll it around. Just so that it sort of sticks to itself there and there. You don't want to fold the sides in too much because then you'll still have a square top. So important that you go from the top edges down. So again, I'm going to fold that one around. So you can see the top of it is quite closed and quite pointy. And it's got a little bit of movement in there from where the veiner was as well. So you do that on all 6 of them. So let's take these out and bring in the 6 from earlier. And they have dried slightly, so again they're much nicer to work with when you're sticking them on, because they don't just flop around all over the place. And then let's turn these over so we can put some glue on the backs. And it's the same as before, just left and right with the glue, and about 3/4 high either side. If you don't put the glue on high enough, then they just end up coming a little bit too open for this style of rose. Right, time to stick them on now. So let's put these petals on now. So bring our flower here, and then again with these 6, they're just going around the sides like what we did with those 8. And you need to put them on just a little bit higher to begin with, because we're going to be folding out the top edges of them so that they are then at the same height as this layer. So you can start pretty much anywhere. I'll bring it onto the side so you can see how much higher I'm going with this. And I'm just going to check it first of all by just folding that over. Yeah, that's fine. So you can see on there the height difference, so it's a little bit higher to allow for that folding out on there. So I'm sticking down the left side only on the first one, because again the 6th one is going to sit inside the first one, and then I'm working around clockwise when I'm always look from the back of the flower. Not too much overlapping, because again you always need to keep an eye on your spacing and always sort of gauging how much petals you've got and how much space you've got to put them on. There's no point in putting loads of them together and then you've got a huge gap for just the last one. So again thinking, well, I've got 6 petals, so when I'm halfway around I should have 3 on there. That looks about right. Again, make sure you're sticking down both sides, but not holding the flower too much. And because the inner layer has completely dried, it just allows us to work on that without worrying that we're going to squash anything. And then open out that last one, that first one, sorry, and put the last one inside there. Always checking your heights as well. Don't go too high with it, just a little bit higher. And then bring in that first petal over the sixth one. Okay, so you've sort of got that look now, and we're just going to fold over the top edges like this. So just use your finger and your thumb to fold it over on each one. If you ever look at O'Hara roses, the outer petals are quite pointy and quite folded over, so it's always useful to have a look at the real things when you're making flowers. I'm actually just going to bring those down a little bit more, just slide them down a little bit. This one's sort of, where it's dried, it's kind of opened out a little bit, but that's okay. I think it's more natural looking, so it's fine. And just make sure they're not too open out, not too high. Okay, so you can see from the side now that that is pretty much all the same height, and we are going to make another layer that's just going to sit slightly lower down below these ones, but they're going to be made in exactly the same way as before. So I'll just turn that round so you can get a good view of that. Okay, so I'm going to put that back into the polystyrene and make the last layer of the petals. So to work on the last layer, it's exactly the same as what we've just done. So it's another 6 petals, exactly the same process. You roll them out, you cut them, you thin over the edges with the rolling pin, and then you use the cocktail stick to fold over the edges to create a little point at the top. The only difference is you just need to make your paste a little bit lighter again before you do this process. So I'm just going to go to the ones that I've done again. So these are just exactly the same, but they're a touch lighter than the previous layer. And again, just going to turn them over and paint some glue on the backs. Just make that a little bit more pointy there. Same again with the glue for the last layer. So 3/4 high on either side, making sure that this is, the point is at the bottom. So let's take our flower again, and we're going to just put these on exactly the same as those ones. And because we're putting 6 petals on top of 6 petals, all we need to do is to put each one over the join of the previous layers. This time though, we're just going to sit them a little bit lower down to finish. So I'm going to place them lower. And again, on the first one, I'm just going to stick down the left side of it only. So you should be, if I turn it over, should be at the base of the bud here. There's not too many outer layers on these roses. thankfully, because there's a decent amount of work on the inside of the flower, so it's nice that there's not too much to do on the outside of it. So I'm just using each join as my guide of where to put the petals. And again, I'm just sticking down left and right. You can always leave the previous layer to dry out a little bit if you want it to be a little bit firmer. Again, with these petals, just fold over the tops of them, folding them outwards slightly. Fold over the top. Sometimes it's easier, I find with bigger flowers, sometimes it's easier just to hold it upside down when you're sticking them on, so you're not sort of fighting against the gravity of the sides of it, because as it gets larger, the outer petals don't have as much to cling onto upright. You can always have a little play with the flower, with the petals, just opening them out here and there, however you want it to look really. And then the last one sits inside the first one. Again, I'm just going to hold that upside down whilst I stick both sides of it down so it doesn't all come off. And then stick that first one down over the sixth one. Just, like I say, just fold out the tops a little bit. You don't want too much gap between there and there. And you don't want to squeeze it at all around the sides either. So I'm just going to flatten that one down a little bit more. Sometimes as well, I like to just open out a little bit of petal here and there so that they're not too rigid. And that is it, pretty much finished. So I'm now just going to cut the wire a little bit shorter and wrap it in some tape to finish. So if I just take some wire cutters, and usually I would go for a couple of inches for the length of it. And then take some tape. Let's just leave that upside down for a second. I can rest it upside down because the inner part is fully dry. Just be very careful with them. And then some florist tape in white. And just pull that a little bit. And then you can hold it gently from the center and just start around the base, the top of the wire, and just make sure it sort of sticks to itself, this tape, and then just twist it around and around until you come towards the bottom of it. You can go up a couple of times if you want to, up and down, depends on how thick you want this to be, so I would say that is probably okay like that. And then you can just cut off or tear off the excess tape. And it should supposedly just stick to itself. So. Okay, and that is the finished flower. So when you are inserting this into a cake, if it's a cake dummy, it's fine just to push it straight in. If it's going into real cake, then you would either just want to use a posy pick or some safety seal, which is like an edible wax that you can dip your taped wires into. And then once that's dry, you can put it straight into the cake and it will be protected from the cake itself. So this is the end of the tutorial, and I really hope you enjoyed it and found it really useful when making one of these flowers. Please give it a go, make sure you practice the flowers, and also just if you have made it and you're really happy with it, please feel free to send us a picture. We'd love to see what you've made using the tutorial, and feel free to post it to any of our social media pages so everyone else can see your beautiful flower. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to look at any more of our tutorials, they're all available on our website, cottonandcrumbs.co.uk. Thank you.